Happy Sabbath to each of you. I want to invite you to take your Bibles now. Let's go back to 1 Kings. We've been doing a lot of study in 1 Kings. We are in the 21st chapter. That's where we stopped the last time. 1 Kings chapter 21. And I want us to look at the last few verses there, verses 27 to 29, which was our conclusion last time. Verse 27, 1 Kings chapter 21. And it came to pass when Ahab heard those words that he rent his clothes and put sackcloth upon his flesh and fasted and lay in sackcloth and went softly. And the word of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite, saying, Seest thou how Ahab humbleth himself before me? Because he humbleth himself before me, I will not bring the evil in his days, but in his son's days will I bring evil upon his house. It was less than 3 years after this pronouncement that King Ahab met his death at the hands of the Syrians. Some years after coming to the throne, Jehoshaphat, now in the height of his prosperity, consented to the marriage of his son Jehoram to Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. We see a union beginning to develop now between Israel in the north and Judah in the south. By this union there was formed between the kingdoms of Judah and Israel an alliance, which was not at all in the order of God, and which in a time of crisis, brought disaster to the king and to so very many of God's people. So as we drop down to chapter 22 this morning, beginning with the first verse, it says, And they continued 3 years without war between Syria and Israel. And it came to pass in the 3rd year that Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, came down to the king of Israel. And the king of Israel said unto his servants, Know ye that Ramoth in Gilead is ours? Now watch this. And we be still and take it not out of the hand of the king of Syria. In other words, that land belongs to us. Are we going to just be quiet and not take it back? It belongs to us. Now watch. And he said unto Jehoshaphat, Wilt thou go with me to battle to Ramoth Gilead? And Jehoshaphat said to the king of Israel, I am as thou art, my people as thy people, my horses as thy horses. Although Jehoshaphat now, in a moment of weakness, has rashly promised to join the king of Israel in a war against the Syrians, yet his better judgment led him to seek to learn the will of God concerning the undertaking. The problem is, he wanted to seek the will of God after he'd already committed himself. So he says, I inquire, I pray thee, that the word of the Lord today, he told Ahab. So in response, Ahab now is going to call together 400 of his false prophets. You know, Ahab always had an abundance of false prophets around him. That's about what he had on the top of Carmel, if you remember. So he calls 400 false prophets and asks them, Shall we go to Ramoth Gilead to battle, or shall I forbear? Should I stay or should I go? And they answered, Go up, for God will deliver it unto the king's hand. Now watch this in 5 and 6. And Jehoshaphat said unto the king of Israel, Inquire, I pray thee, at the word of the Lord today. Then the king of Israel gathered the prophets together, about 400 men, and said unto them, Shall I go against Ramoth Gilead to battle, or shall I forbear? And they said, Go up, for the Lord shall deliver it unto the hand of the king. Go on up and do it. Why in the world would you want to believe false prophets? They were false prophets. Even Jehoshaphat understood this. And so unconvinced and unsatisfied with the reports of 400 people, Jehoshaphat sought to learn if this was really the will of the Lord. Watch what he does. And Jehoshaphat said, is there not a prophet of the Lord besides these, that I might inquire of him? Isn't there anybody else? This isn't sounding right to me, guys. Is there anybody else out there? And the king of Israel said unto Jehoshaphat, there is yet one man, Micaiah, the son of Imlah, by whom we may inquire of the Lord. But I what? I hate him. Why? For he doth not prophesy good concerning me, but evil. And Jehoshaphat said, let not the king say so. Then the king of Israel called an officer and said, hasten hither Micaiah, the son of Imlah. And the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, sat each on his throne, having put on their robes in a void place in the entrance of the gate of Samaria, and all the prophets prophesied before them. So those 400 are still at it. And Zedekiah, the son of Kenama, made him horns of iron. And he said, thus saith the Lord, with these shalt thou push the Syrians until thou have consumed them. And all the prophets prophesied, so saying, go up to Ramoth Gilead and prosper, for the Lord shall deliver it unto the king's hand. And the messenger that was gone to call Micaiah spake unto him, saying, behold, now the words of the prophets declare good to the king with one mouth. Let thy word, I pray thee, be like the word of one man, and speak that which is good. He's trying to tell the prophet what to say. Others have all said this. There's been 400. Agree with the other guys. And Micaiah said, as the Lord liveth, and the Lord saith unto me, that will I speak. So he came to the king, and the king said unto him, Micaiah, shall we go against Ramoth Gilead to battle, or shall we forbear? And he answered him, go and prosper, for the Lord shall deliver it unto thy hand, to the hand of the king. And the king said unto him, how many times shall I abjure thee, that thou tell me nothing but that which is true in the name of the Lord? So now Ahab even says, don't lie to me. Don't lie to me. These other 400 have. Not. This is what's ironic. He knows this. And then verse 17. And he said, I saw all Israel scattered upon the hills as sheep that have not a shepherd. And the Lord said, these have no master. Let them return every man to his own house in peace. It's a very interesting story of what's going on there in Samaria. The words of the prophet should have been enough to show the kings that their endeavor was not favored by heaven. But neither ruler felt inclined to heed the warning. And Ahab had marked out his course, and he was determined to follow it. And Jehoshaphat chose to ignore the counsel of God and go with Ahab. You see, he had given his word of honor. He said, I will go with thee in war. And after making that promise, he was reluctant to withdraw his forces. So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, went up to Ramoth Gilead. Verse 30 now. Dropping all the way down here to verse 30. And the king of Israel said unto Jehoshaphat, I will disguise myself and enter into the battle, but put thou on thy robes. And the king of Israel disguised himself and went into battle. Now, I want you to see this. Oh, what a sly old fox Ahab was. I'm going to dress up like a regular guy, but I want you to put on all of your regalia. Why? Because he would be the prime target. He would be the prime target, and Ahab would just look like another one of the guys. So during the battle that followed, Ahab, even though he was disguised, was shot by an arrow, and that very night he died. Thus was fulfilled the words of the prophet concerning him. Dropping down to verse 37. So the king died and was brought to Samaria, and they buried the king in Samaria. And one washed the chariots in the pool of Samaria, and the dogs licked up the blood, and they washed his armor according unto the word of the Lord which he had spake. That had been prophesied, hadn't it? Elijah had told him, the dogs are going to lick up your blood. He also said, the dogs are going to eat your wife. That's yet to come. So, from the disastrous battle, Jehoshaphat returned back down to Jerusalem. As he approached the city now, the prophet Jehu, the one that's going to end up killing Jezebel, met him with a very strong rebuke. So I want us to move from Kings into Chronicles for a moment. Go to 2 Chronicles chapter 19 to get the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. 2 Chronicles chapter 19. Don't lose your place back there. We're coming back to Kings again. Chapter 19, we're going to read the first few verses here in the 19th chapter. And Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, returned to his house in peace to Jerusalem. And Jehu, son of Hanani, the seer, went out to meet him and said to King Jehoshaphat, Shouldest thou help the ungodly and love them that hate the Lord? Wherefore is wrath upon thee from before the Lord? Nevertheless, there are good things found in thee, in that thou hast taken away the groves out of the land, and hast prepared thine heart to seek God. You see, Jehoshaphat, in later years, his reign became largely spent in strengthening the national and spiritual defenses of the nation of Israel. One other event toward the close of Jehoshaphat's reign here that is quite interesting is found in the next chapter. The kingdom of Judah was invaded by an army before whose approach the inhabitants of the land had extreme reason to be trembling. So dropping down to chapter 20 now, and let's look at the first few verses here. And it came to pass after this also, that the children of Moab and the children of Ammon, with them other besides Ammonites, came against Jehoshaphat to battle. So now the Ammonites, the Moabites, and others are coming to attack Jehoshaphat in Jerusalem. Then there came some that told Jehoshaphat, saying, There cometh a great number against thee from beyond the sea on this side Syria. And behold, they be in Hazan Tamar, which is Engalattai. And Jehoshaphat feared and set himself to seek the Lord, and proclaimed a fast throughout all Judah. So Jehoshaphat now knows that all of these people are coming against him. But he's been spending years fortifying the cities, strengthening his army. But he realized that in view of what lay ahead for him, he needed more than what he had in his own provisions. He could not meet these people on his own, and he realized that. And so he proclaimed a fast throughout the whole land of Judah. For years he'd been strengthening his armies and his fortified cities, and he was well prepared to meet almost any foe. Yet in this crisis, he did not put his trust in his strength or in his fortifications. Not by disciplined armies and fenced cities, but by a living faith in the God of Israel, could he hope to gain victory over these heathen who so arrogantly boasted of their power to humble Judah in the eyes of all of the surrounding nations. So as the people joined with their king in humbling themselves before God and asking him for help, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jehaziel, a Levite of the sons of Asaph, and his words are now found down in verses 15 and 18. Just dropping down at what this prophet comes to say. Beginning with verse 15. And he said, Hearken ye all Judea, and ye inhabitants of Jerusalem, and thou King Jehoshaphat, thus saith the Lord unto you, Be not afraid nor dismayed by reason of this great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but whose? But God's. Every battle we face in life, friends, is God's battle if we'll just let him fight it for us. When they crossed the Jordan to Jericho, how many arrows were shot? How many spears thrown? What happened? God tore down the walls, and he would have done that for everything that lied before them had they followed him. Now, going on here. Tomorrow go ye down against them. Behold, they come up by the cliff of Ziz, and ye shall find them at the end of the brook, before the wilderness of Jeruel. Ye shall not need to fight in this battle. Wow, now there's quite a battle, huh? You don't have to fight in this battle. Set yourselves, stand ye still, and see the salvation of the Lord with you, O Judah and Jerusalem. Fear not, nor be dismayed. Tomorrow go out against them, for the Lord will be with you. That's kind of like what we should talk a little bit about in our Sabbath school today, isn't it? We don't have to be afraid, don't have to worry about anything. If God is going before us, just don't run before God. And here it says, And Jehoshaphat bowed his head with his face to the ground, and all Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem fell before the Lord, worshiping the Lord. Look at verse 20. And they rose early in the morning and went forth into the wilderness of Tekoa. And as they went forth, Jehoshaphat stood and said, now, this is important, friends, to us as a remnant people especially. Hear me, O Judah, and ye inhabitants of Jerusalem. Believe in the Lord your God, so shall ye be established. Believe his prophets, so shall ye prosper. Our problem today is we've fallen short on both of those. We really have. As a matter of fact, we tried to defrock the prophet because the prophet said things that we didn't want to hear, just like with Ahab. A little further down, verse 24. And when Judah came toward the watchtower in the wilderness, they looked unto the multitude, and behold, they were dead bodies fallen on the earth, and none escaped. They were already dead when they got there. And when Jehoshaphat and his people came to take away the spoil of them, they found among them in abundance both riches with the dead bodies and precious jewels which they had stripped off for themselves, more than they could carry away. And they were 3 days in gathering the spoil, and it was so much. good night. Imagine that. More than they could carry. 3 days it took to gather all of these jewels and all of these valuable things up. God was going to enrich his people because of their faith in trusting in God. Then he says in verse 26, and on the 4th day they assembled themselves in the valley of Berachah, and there they blessed the Lord. Therefore the name of the place was called the Valley of Berachah unto this day. This is what God could do. Ahaziah, Ahab's successor, did evil in the sight of the Lord and walked not in the ways of his father. But now let's go back to Kings. Let's go back to 1 Kings chapter 22. I want us to drop down to verse 51. Ahaziah, the son of Ahab, began to reign over Israel in Samaria, the 17th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah. And he reigned 2 years over Israel. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord, and walked in the ways of his father, and in the way of his mother, that's Ahab and Jezebel, and in the way of Jehoram, the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin. For he served Baal and worshipped him, and provoked to anger the Lord God of Israel, according to all that his father had done. They were returning right back to the arrogance and the idolatry of their past, of what his mother and father had done. But the judgments followed close upon the sins of this rebellious king. A disastrous war developed between Israel and Moab now. And there occurred an accident by which his own life was threatened, which attested to God's wrath against Ahaziah. Having fallen through a lattice in the upper chamber, Ahaziah was seriously injured. He was fearful of the possible outcome, and he sent some of his servants to make inquiry of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron, as to whether or not he should recover. Here he knew all of the past, but he sins not to God, not to one of his prophets, but he goes to Beelzebub, a false god, a pagan deity. Now watch what happens as we go into the 2nd chapter of the book of Kings. Then Moab rebelled against Israel after the death of Ahab, and Ahaziah fell down through the lattice in his upper chamber that was in Samaria, and was sick. And he sent messengers and said unto them, Go inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron, whether I shall recover of this disease. The god of Ekron was supposed to be able to give information through the medium of his priests concerning future events. Large numbers of people went to this false god concerning various events in their life, but the predictions that were given and the information they received proceeded from the Prince of Darkness himself. Look at verse 3. But the angel of the Lord said to Elijah the Tishbite. Now Elijah is going to come back in again in all of his fury. Arise, go meet the messengers of the king of Samaria, and say unto them, Is it not because there is not a God in Israel that you go and to inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron? Now therefore, thus saith the Lord, Thou shalt not come down from that bed on which thou art gone up, but shall surely die. And then Elijah just went away. He departed. I'm sure those messengers looked around and said, where'd that man go? Where'd he go? So they go back to King Ahab. And having delivered the message to, not to Ahab, to his son, having delivered his message, the prophet departed. And astonished, the servants went back, repeated the words to the man of God. And now watch the response of the king of Israel in verse 5. And when the messengers turned back unto him, he said unto them, why are you now turned back? And they said unto him, there came a man up to meet us and said to us, go turn again to the king that sent you, and say unto him, thus saith the Lord, is it not because there is not a God in Israel that thou sendest to inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron? Therefore thou shalt not come down from that bed on which you are gone up, but you shall surely die. And he said unto them, what manner of man was he which came up to meet you and told you these words? And they said unto him, he was a hairy man, and girt with a girdle of leather about his loins. And he said, it is Elijah the Tishbite. Ahaziah knew that this was Elijah, and that everything Elijah ever said happened, and that he was a dead man. Now that must have had a tremendous impact on Ahaziah. He knew that the messenger was indeed the prophet. The words of doom pronounced thus would surely come to pass. So anxious to avert, if at all possible, this threatened judgment, he determined to send for the prophet. Now watch what happens when he actually calls for the true prophet. In verse 9. Then the king sent unto him a captain of 50. Now watch how he goes about it though. What happens? He sent a captain of 50 with his 50, and he went up to him, and behold, he sat on the top of a hill, and he spake unto him, thou man of God, the king has said, come down. Wow. And Elijah answered and said to the captain of 50, if I be the man of God, then let fire come down from heaven and consume thee and thy 50. And there came down fire from heaven and consumed him and his 50. Be careful how you treat a prophet. Remember the kids called Elisha years later, Old Baldy, and what happened to them? Bears came out of the woods and ate them. Don't disrespect the messenger of God, ever. It's a warning from God. And so the fire came down and consumed them, but that isn't enough. So Ahaziah sent again a captain of the third 50. Where did I leave off? In verse 11, he sent also another captain of 50 with his 50, and he answered and said unto him, O man of God, thus hath the king said, come down quickly. And Elijah answered and said unto them, if I be a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and consume thee and thy 50. And fire came down from heaven and consumed him and his 50. I'd hated to have been a captain in this guy's army, because it says that he sent again a captain of the third 50 with his 50. But this captain learned. And the third captain of 50 went up and came and fell on his knees before Elijah and besought him and said unto him, O man of God, I pray thee, let my life and the life of these 50 thy servants be precious in thy sight. Behold, there came down fire from heaven and burned up the two captains and the former 50s with their 50s. Therefore let my life now be precious in thy sight. And the angel of the Lord said unto Elijah, Go down with him. Be not afraid of him, And he arose and went down with him unto the king. And he said unto him, Thus saith the Lord, forasmuch as thou hast sent messengers to inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron, is it not because there is no God in Israel to inquire of his word? Therefore thou shalt not come down off that bed on which thou art gone up, but shalt surely die. So he died according to the word of the Lord, which Elijah had spoken. And Jehoram reigned in his stead in the 2nd year of Jehoram the son of Jehoshaphat of Judah, because he had no son. So during his father's reign, Ahaziah had witnessed the wondrous works of the Most High God. He had seen the terrible evidences that God had given to apostate Israel of how he regards those who set his will and follow his inclinations of their own perverse minds. They want to do what they want to do. They want to do not only what they want to do, they want to do it in the way they want to do it. And they want to do it when they want to do it. Yet Ahaziah had acted as if all of those realities of the past were but idle tales. So instead of humbling his heart before the Lord, he followed after Baal. And at last he ventured upon this, his most daring act of disrespect and rebellion. Rebellious and unwilling to repent, Ahaziah died according to the word of the Lord, which Elijah had spoken. Now, the history of King Ahaziah's sin and its punishment has in it a warning which none of us today can disregard without retribution. Men and women today may not pay homage to heathen gods, yet thousands upon thousands are worshiping at Satan's shrine as verily as did this king of Israel. The spirit of idolatry is abundant in both the world and in the church today. Although it is hidden under the influence of science and education, it has assumed forms more refined and attractive than in the days when Ahaziah sought the God of Ekron. The sorrowful evidences that faith in the sure word of prophecy is decreasing becomes more discernible to us every day that we live. And in its place, superstition, humanism, ecumenism, kingly power, and satanic delusions are captivating the minds of so very many. As with ancient Israel, the people have begun to follow in the footsteps of their leaders, rather than the path that the Lord has set forth for them. What do our leaders do? What do they say? Where is the crying call? What saith the word of the Lord? They follow the footsteps of their leaders rather than the path that the Lord has set. And if only we would believe and claim God's promise, I will direct their work in truth. He promised that to Isaiah. I will direct their work in truth. Friends, I want you to know fully that if our work is not in truth, we cannot expect, but we can be assured that it will not be directed by God. It cannot be. The heavenly assurance is, I have raised him up in righteousness, and I will direct all his ways. So today, as we conclude, I want to leave you with this assurance, this divine appeal found in Proverbs 3 verses 5 to 7. It was our scripture reading today, in case you've already forgotten that. These words I want you to take with you today. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart. Lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Be not wise in thine own eyes. Fear the Lord, and depart from evil. God bless you.